Namaste. Welcome back, Stellar Stargazers, and a warm cosmic hello to our new listeners. I'm Sophie.
And I'm Heather, and you're tuning into the Stellar Soulcast, where we decode the cosmos one episode at a time. And in our last episode, we reviewed the moon and the significance of the lunar cycles. But today, we have something special in house for you in reflection of the U.S. Independence Day, which, at the time of this recording, is, bam, today. So happy Independence Day. We're going to step in a time machine back in the years of the American Revolution and study the skies. Because while history books tell us what happened, astrology helps us understand why it happened and when.
That's right. In this special featured episode, we're exploring the powerful transits like Pluto in Capricorn and Aquarius and Uranus in Gemini that were unfolding in the heavens during the birth of the United States. These weren't just background vibes, they were the cosmic catalyst for rebellion, reinvention, and radical change.
And what's really wild is that many of those same planetary transits are coming back around today in our lifetimes. So we're not just talking about history, we're talking about cycles, echoes, and patterns that repeat across the generations.
So if you've ever wondered how planets shape revolutions, or why astrology shows up in moments of chaos and clarity alike, this episode is for you. Mm-hmm. Let's journey through the stars of 1776 and see what they still have to teach us today. Let's dive in.
All right. We're going to first break down some fundamentals so you can follow along with us a little better throughout the episode. We first want to break down what exactly transits are, because I'm sure many of you who are new to astrology may not really be on that page. So, Sophie, do you want to tell our wonderful stargazer community a little bit about transits?
Yes. So, a transit is when a planet in its current movement forms a relationship with the position of a planet or angle in a natal chart. For people, that means it's activating something personal in your birth chart. But astrologically speaking, we can also apply this to nations, events, and even institutions. Countries, like people, have birth charts. And when planets move through the sky, they interact with those charts, which trigger themes, challenges, and growth.
And it's also important to stress that even without a chart, though, transits shape the collective energy. When a slow-moving planet shifts signs or meets another planet in the sky, we often feel those changes on a cultural, political, or societal level. Sometimes we feel it subtly and sometimes explosively, especially with the outer and social planets. Right, Sophie?
Absolutely. And stargazers, if you listened to episode 4, Heather and I discussed a brief overview of the planetary bodies in astrology. And you may recall that we mentioned that the social and outer planets often influence generational themes. That is because they are slow-moving, and some take years or even decades to shift signs or complete a transit. That is why their influence are often tied to generational themes or world events. Now let's quickly recap these planets. So the social planets include Jupiter and Saturn. Now, Jupiter is associated with growth, expansion, and belief systems, while Saturn is associated with authority, structure, karma, and responsibility. Now, the outer planets, which include Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Now, Uranus is commonly tied to innovation, rebellion, and disruption. Neptune is associated with spirituality, illusion, and mass consciousness, while Pluto is tied to power, destruction, transformation, and rebirth. Now, this is so important historically speaking because outer planets represent collective energies. Because of this, their movements and alignments often mark turning points in history. Think revolutions, reforms, collapses, and renaissances. Now that we reviewed transits with you, we next want to quickly go over planetary returns. So, Heather, do you want to take it from here and explain?
Sure. Well, everyone, if you're new to astrology, you might be thinking, what is a planetary return? A planetary return happens when a planet returns to the exact position it was at the time of birth on a natal chart. You can think of it kind of similar to a cosmic birthday, but for transformation of maturation. And this is applicable to any natal chart, regardless if it's a personal chart or a nation's natal chart. But the length of the planetary return varies for each planetary body. For the purpose of this episode, we're going to review the length of time for the returns of the social and outer planets we'll be discussing. The social planets are Jupiter and Saturn. So Jupiter's return takes place roughly every 12 years. This is associated with expansion, opportunity, and worldview shift. Saturn's return happens roughly every 29.5 years. This is associated with major life restructuring, maturity, responsibility. And moving forward to the outer planets, Uranus's return happens roughly every 84 years. This is associated with rebellion, innovation, sudden change, freedom and awakening, disruption of the status quo, technological advancement. Neptune's return, which takes place roughly 165 years, this is associated with spiritual awakening, illusion, dissolution, idealism, destiny, deception, and collective dreams. And our last little outer planet, Pluto, which happens roughly every 248 years. This is associated with total transformation, death, and rebirth of those power structures.
Yes, and fun fact, Heather, actually, since Neptune has been discovered, it's only had one full return.
In the U.S.?
No.
Or just in general?
In general, since it's been discovered. Remember, it's one of the most recent planets.
Oh my gosh.
To be discovered. Yeah,
we've said that so many times. I'm just all about the history of the United States right now. Tunnel vision, Heather.
It's okay.
Oh, could that be like a new thing? Tunnel vision, Heather? No, I don't want to be called Tunnel Vision, Heather.
We could put it on a t-shirt.
Oh, yeah, right? Maybe we'll drop it. Look in the bio. So let's move on to some fun examples, or a example, I should say, because at the time of this recording, the United States just finished its first Pluto return at the end of 2024. This is something that no person ever lives to experience, but the nations do. This is huge because it echoes the original revolutionary energy from the 1700s. Mm-hmm. That's why everything from our politics to our economy and to our cultural foundations is being deeply re-examined. But we'll talk more about this shortly. To summarize this little section here, when we say astrology helps us understand history, this is exactly what we mean. We really want you to be mindful, though, that transits don't make things happen. They just help reveal when the soil may be fertile for change.
Wow, I like that.
Right?
Yeah.
But now that we've laid the groundwork for transits and planetary returns, I'm going to pass the spotlight back to Sophie, who's going to kick off the transits surrounding the American Revolution.
All right. Yes, let's focus in on some key transits during the U.S. Revolutionary period. Now, from 1775 to 1783, the sky was pulsing with powerful planetary energy that aligned with one of the most radical turning points in world history. And we're not just talking about symbolism here. We're talking about massive outer planetary movements that echoed real-time rebellion, reinvention, and rebirth. The birth chart of America has long been debated, but we are going to be using the chart created by Ebenezer Scrooge. Ebenezer Sibley. Using
same initials too.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Actually, it's kind of funny when you think of the story, but we're using the chart created by Mr. Sibley, using July 4th, 1776 as the birth date with Philadelphia as the location. A fun note, is using his chart, the U.S. would have a Cancer sun, a Sagittarius rising sign, and an Aquarius moon. Additionally, the placement of Jupiter and Saturn is in their exaltation signs, Jupiter in Cancer and Saturn in Libra. At the time of the founding, which has been noted, suggests a potential connection to astrological principles. Now, we are going to quickly talk about some of the bigger social and outer transits which occurred during this time, and that is Pluto in Capricorn and Aquarius, Uranus in Taurus and Gemini, Neptune in Virgo, and Saturn in Sagittarius, Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pluto. Pluto, Pisces, our fishy friends.
Fishies.
Yeah. And as Heather previously mentioned, Saturn takes about 29.5 years to complete a return, meaning it stays in each zodiac sign for roughly 2.5 years. As a result, during the American Revolution, Saturn was in several signs. But let's talk a little bit about each of them in detail. So with Saturn in Sagittarius, the themes included expansion versus restriction, philosophical and political clashes, and the relevance of this is when Saturn is in Sagittarius, it reflects the ideological tension between what was the American colonies in Britain, religious freedom, legal rights, and the clash of belief systems. And this aligns with the lead up to the Declaration of Independence in 1776, which ended off that Saturn in Sagittarius period. Now, moving on to Saturn in Capricorn from 1776 until 1778. Now, some of those themes included authority, government, discipline, restructuring, and having Saturn in Capricorn, it entered its home sign, and the revolution became more organized and institutional. The period marked the establishment of structured political efforts like the Articles of Confederation and formal Continental Army leadership. So a lot of those things were coming about. Now, with Saturn in Aquarius from 1778 until 1781, some of the themes that showed up were rebellion, innovation, and collective actions, which is all associated with Aquarius. Now, the relevance of having that Saturn in Aquarius, it echoed the drive for freedom, individual rights, and revolutionary ideals, okay? It was during this transit that major shifts occurred, including the alliance with France in 1778 and the eventual surrender of British General Cornwallis at Yorktown in 1781. Now, finally, Saturn in Pisces, which was from 1781 to 1784. These themes include transition, healing, and dissolution of the old. Having Saturn in Pisces during this time marked the wind down of the war and the beginning of national soul searching. The Treaty of Paris was signed in 1783, and it formally ended the war and signaled the spiritual rebirth of the U.S. Now, Heather, would you like to give us a brief synopsis of Uranus?
Yeah, definitely. I just wanted to note one thing, though, which I thought was interesting, how applicable it was to each sign, especially as a Sagittarius, being somebody that doesn't like to be held down, you know, and it really started to have that expansion energy and having an attitude of just saying, I'm going to cut you loose and go forward.
Yeah.
So that was very interesting. But moving on to Uranus. Uranus has a much lower orbit than Saturn. Slower, not lower. Oh my goodness. Uranus has a much slower orbit than Saturn, and as I just previously mentioned, takes roughly 84 years to complete a full cycle. So during the American Revolution, which took place from 1775 to 1783, Uranus actually moved through 2 zodiac signs. Here's a breakdown of that revolutionary journey. Uranus was in Taurus from 1767 to 1775. There were many pre-revolutionary events that took place, where Uranus in Taurus had a huge significance on. So during this time, themes of disruption of stability, upheaval of values, rebellion against material and economic systems took place. And the relevance of this is that Uranus in Taurus signaled growing unrest around resources, land ownership, and economic control, all major grievances of the colonies toward British taxation and trade laws. This transit also fueled the Boston Tea Party, which took place in 1773, and other early revolutionary sparks. But colonists were questioning the value systems imposed upon them, and you know what? They were just ready to shake that status quo up. Moving on to Uranus in Gemini, which took place between 1775 and 1782. The theme surrounding this was radical ideas, communication, revolutions, intellectual rebellion, spreading knowledge. And one thing here with the relevance is Uranus was transiting during this time. So there was a few months where it was in Gemini in 1774, but it went direct in April 8th of 1775. And this was just days before the Battle of Lexington, which broke out on April 19th of 1775. And this was the battle that is associated with the start of the American Revolution. As a result, warfare during the American Revolution was occupied entirely in Uranus and Gemini. Uranus and Gemini brought revolutionary discourse, pamphleteering, and ideological warfare. Think of Thomas Paine's Common Sense. As it is the planet of revolution and invention, moving through the sign of communication and ideas. As a result, this was a period of major informational awakening, perfect for a revolution fueled by Enlightenment principles. And the Declaration of Independence, 1776, and other founding documents emerged during this intellectually charged transit. I just wanted to give a little quick breakdown of the side-by-side of Uranus in Taurus and Gemini. So during the years of 1767 to 1775, when it was in Taurus, a lot of the events were disrupting material power, resisting taxation, protesting values. And as we move forward to Uranus and Gemini 1775 to 1782, you see a shift to enlightenment, radical ideas, and revolutionary communication. That's our little summary on Uranus, and we're going to get into Uranus and Gemini a little bit more here today. But in the meantime, Sophie, you want to kick off our Neptunian planet?
Yes. Neptune moves very slowly, taking about 165 years to complete a full orbit. So during the American Revolution from 1775 until 1783, Neptune remained in just one sign, Virgo. Now, Neptune is the dreamer. It rules ideals, illusions, and spiritual energy, and Virgo is about service, systems, and sacrifice. Here's the dreamy, mystical breakdown. With Neptune being in Virgo from 1749 until 1793, some of the themes that came up were things where vision meets practicality, sacred duty, idealism in service, and dissolving old systems through critical reform. Now, the relevance. Neptune in Virgo colored the entire revolutionary period with a deep sense of mission and service. Virgo is grounded and analytical, and when Neptune transits, its spiritual order, health, and responsibility is all highlighted. Now, this transit brought a vision of a better system, not just rebellion for rebellion's sake. The founding fathers weren't only breaking from Britain, they were dreaming up a functional, improved society. It also reflects a mystical belief in structure, the ideal of a more perfect union, designed with practical laws and sacred principles. But with Neptune, there's always a fog. Some were sacrificing for freedom, but many were excluded from that freedom. There were illusions too, and those would eventually need to be reckoned with. Now, looking at some of those themes in depth, how they showed up. When it came to spiritual service, sacrificing comfort for the collective cause, were soldiers, thinkers, and citizens aligned in service to freedom, with the theme of a utopian reform, drafting the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence with philosophical precision, and purifying systems, breaking down the old imperial order to build a more virtuous, fair, and efficient government. And lastly, where dreams meet discipline, the challenge of turning revolutionary ideas into functional reality. But let's move over to Pluto, where Heather will kick us off.
All right. Let's complete the revolutionary outer planet picture with our little guy Pluto, the planet of power, death, rebirth, and transformation. Pluto moves very slowly, taking roughly 248 years to orbit the sun. It is believed to expose hidden truths and bring about radical changes in the areas it rules. Furthermore, what is important to highlight is that Pluto was in retrograde during the start of the American Revolution, as it was transiting from Capricorn to Aquarius. This is significant because when Pluto is in retrograde, it can intensify these transformative energies, potentially leading to greater upheaval or stagnation. Another interesting take to add is when Pluto moves into a new sign, it comes with the face of terror, where it often takes a new shape. And this is exactly what happened. Let's give a brief review of Pluto's movements during the American Revolution.
Whoa.
So much. It's just a lot of ominous here, our Pluto guy. But
it's a lot of build-up.
Yeah, it is a lot of build-up. So Pluto entered Capricorn in 1762. Pluto remained in Capricorn until 1778. Pluto entered Aquarius in 1778. Pluto continued in Aquarius well into the early 1790s. Now that we have that little timeline here, let's talk about Pluto in Capricorn during the revolutionary events leading up to the Battle of Lexington and during the first two of the three phases of the American Revolution. Most of the core revolutionary events occurred during this phase, which included the Stamp Act in 1765, the Boston Tea Party in 1773, the Declaration of Independence, 1776. These are all Capricorn themes of breaking authoritarian structure and rebuilding government. And moving on to Pluto in Aquarius between 1778 and 1799, Pluto entered Aquarius just as the Revolutionary War was entering its third phase, and it greatly influenced the development and the ideas of what would become the newly founded nation of the United States. Themes of radical restructuring, progressive experimentation, and people-powered government started to take root, such as the Articles of Confederation in 1781, the U.S. Constitution, which was drafted in 1787 and ratified in 1788. A brief summary of Pluto in Capricorn and Aquarius can be described as destruction of monarchy and imperial control, birth of new institutions, specifically in Capricorn, and in Aquarius, it could be associated with the rise of democratic ideals, innovation in government, post-war rebuilding. So while military conflict ended in 1781, the official diplomatic end of the American Revolution wasn't until 1783. And that is where that Pluto in Aquarius really helped shape those founding ideals of the United States. But going forward, let's give some insight on Pluto and Aquarius. There's a lot of stuff here that Sophie's going to tell us about.
Oh, yes. So with Pluto and Aquarius, a massive cosmic shift occurs, and it transforms power structures through people-centered revolutions, technological awakenings, and radical restructuring of society. Now, in the 1700s, Pluto last transit in Aquarius from 1777 to 1798. And during that time, the world saw some of the most iconic revolutions in human history. Now, here's a breakdown of some of those major revolutions. So, starting off, the French Revolution, which took place from 1789 to 1799, some key events that happened during the French Revolution that could be tied to that Pluto and Aquarius theme. The storming of Bastille in 1789, the Declaration of the Rights of Man, 1789, the abolition of the monarchy, 1792, and the Reign of Terror, 1793 through 1794. Now, how Pluto and Aquarius influences change. It targeted the people versus aristocracy, the birth of secular democracy and human rights movements, and the toppling of old regimes, the rise of revolutionary mobs and idealistic reforms. Now, moving along, let's look at the Haitian Revolution, which began in 1791. Some key events started with the uprising of enslaved Africans in Saint-Domingue, which was sparked by the French Revolution and the Enlightenment of ideals. And it eventually led to the first successful slave-led nation in 1804. Now, how Pluto and Aquarius influenced this revolution? Well, it targeted the liberation from oppressive systems, the grassroots revolting, which was rooted in human dignity, and the shattering of racial and colonial hierarchies. Now, moving along, looking at the European radical movements inspired by some of these Enlightenment moments. First, we'll look at the Polish Constitution of 1791, the first in Europe, the rise of revolutionary clubs and societies in Britain, Ireland, Italy, and Germany, and even the early feminist and abolitionist movements began to stir during this time. The Pluto and Aquarius role really targeted the dissemination of revolutionary ideals, the rejection of kings and priests as sole power holders, and the beginning of long-term societal restructuring. Now, bonus, looking at scientific and technological awakenings, some advancements, the rise of modern chemistry, Lavoisier, the invention of the smallpox vaccine, 1796. But Pluto and Aquarius influences continued as the breakthroughs for the common good continued to rise, and science was used as a tool of liberation and equality, and the disillusion of feudal and religious dominance over knowledge. My. But in summary, when looking at the American Revolution and its later phases, 1777 to 1783, the power to the people and democracy is born. With the French Revolution, 1789 to 1799, the collapse of the monarchy by and the rise of rights and radicalism. Juice. And the Haitian Revolution, 1791 and to 1804, enslaved Haitian people rose up. Right? And it focused on race, power, and liberty clashes. But they overcame. And the European waves, the 1790s, where the Enlightenment ideals rippled outward. And of course, the scientific shifts. No, I love
my little bad sound effects there.
The scientific shifts of the late 1700s, incorporating logic, innovation, and equality through science, all highlighting that Pluto and Aquarius influence. So snaps to Pluto and Aquarius. Now, some interesting things to note is that there are themes which arise when Pluto is in a new sign, some of which when Pluto was in Scorpio, 1983 to 1984 through 1997. Just missed it. No, I'm just kidding. But I'm sorry, guys. Okay, focus. Pluto and Scorpio, we get the serial killers where fear takes a new shape, where we have really, really terrible things that happen due to these psycho killers.
Crazy mofos.
Such as Richard Ramirez and Jeffrey Dahmer. Boo. Unfortunately, fear takes an even darker turn when Pluto goes into Sagittarius between 1997 through 2008, where it seemed like terrorists were the highlight, right? Multiple bombings in the Middle East, war in the Middle East countries, then also insane mass shootings. Somehow they all occurred during Pluto and Sagittarius, where we kind of found that the fear, we should say, was terrorism.
Yeah.
Right? Where Pluto and Sagittarius takes that form.
So sad.
Moving on, though, with Pluto and Capricorn from 2008 to 2024, fear takes shape in the mechanisms in civilizations, right? Where like the basic parts of, how we go about day-to-day life, right? Yeah, so the stock market crashing took effect on everyone because it affected like your kind of like your day-to-day influence, right?
Everything, which led into everything. The homeowner.
Yeah, the housing
market, which
how
went
much
down.
Everything costs.
Gosh.
Everywhere.
Millennials, we've been through it all.
Yeah, honestly, a lot.
Well, I guess we have a borderline millennial, but.
Yeah. But, okay, to focus, it was the collapse.
Yeah.
Which is related to Capricorn, some Capricorn themes.
Yep.
Yeah, being Earth sign and things like that. And then with the U.S. Pluto return, 2022, the deep structural review of American institutions, echoing its founding. And another big one is Uranus and Gemini. Now, Heather, I want you to give us some insight of Uranus and Gemini throughout American history.
Oh man, there's so much there.
Yeah.
Just like Pluto, these two are
some heavy hitters.
Yeah, some very heavy hitters here. I'm like, woo. So,
yeah.
But what Uranus and Gemini is a powerful transit for revolutions of ideas, communication, transportation, and national identity. And for the United States, it has consistently aligned with major wars tied to ideological shifts, internal division, or national expansion, surrounding many themes which include radical communication, technological innovation, and ideological revolutions. So, first, American newspapers and pamphlets exploded in the 1770s. So I'm just going to go back to the beginning of the American Revolution and how that technological innovation led to that radical communication, which helped spread
that drive for change.
Exactly. Exactly. So you had common sense, you had the crisis, right? Uranus amplifies those collective messaging. And then moving forward into the mid 1800s, and I'm going to circle back to all of this, you have the telegraph, right? The invention of the telegraph.
Whoa.
And that revolutionary leap in communication, which is going to be very applicable in a moment. And now I'm going to talk about Uranus in Gemini during another major war that the United States had. We had the American Revolution, but Uranus was also in Gemini during the Civil War. So during the Civil War of 1861 to 1865, it occurred during a powerful Uranus in Gemini transit. Gemini's themes of division, duality, and ideology were front and center. You had the North versus the South, or the Union versus the Confederacy, and the idea of freedom versus slavery. And the communication of technologies, like I just said, with the telegraph, changed the wartime strategies. Gemini also rules transport and movement, and this period saw the use of railroads and fast troop movement, which was much different than what happened during the American Revolution, where you had that pamphleteering, right? So now they had these fast-paced ways of communication. And this one now, fast forward, Uranus in Gemini, which took place in 1941 to 1949. I'm sure our history buffs out there have already guessed what war the United States entered in 1941.
World War II.
World War II. Thank you, Sophie.
Yeah.
So during World War II, we all know, started a little earlier than 1941, but the themes around World War II was the Allies versus the Axis power, right? So during this time, we had seen, or the world, I wasn't alive in 1941, but there was core themes of propaganda warfare, massive radio broadcasts, and national unity messaging, advancements in military communication, cryptography, and aircraft, right? So rise of women and minorities in industrial and military roles. You can see that Gemini duality there. Mm-hmm. The Cold War foundations were laid by the end of this transit. So you had the Truman Doctrine in 1947, the Berlin Airlift in 1948, emerged from post-war tensions, ideological conflicts between capitalism and communication. So this cosmic echo here is that Uranus in Gemini, again, fuels a global ideological war driven by speech, technology, and the battle for minds. So for some of you that are well-versed and can math well, I am sure you're realizing that we are approaching Uranus in Gemini once again.
Yes.
In this very month. And so in 2025, we're coming back around, and we don't know what's going to be in store. No. But with the past of seeing the events of warfare and that link to communication, there are a lot of speculation out there of what may happen. Some of the expected themes are cyber warfare, misinformation, especially with many AI-driven conflicts, right? We are all seeing the advancement of AI. It's everywhere. Battles over identity, language, education, and civil rights have also been very prominent and are projected to continue forward in voicing those,
I guess, areas of society.
Yeah, areas of society. Possibly major domestic unrest and restructuring of the American government or media systems, which is unfortunately already happening. Or even, with some of that energy happening now, look what happened with TikTok earlier this year.
Yes.
Right? And so much more. I mean, but that's some kind of, not residuals, but
I think we're going to talk about it in a little bit, is when a lot of these planets start to move in different signs, they go to these critical degrees, which are about from like 27 or 28 degrees until the start of the new sign up until like the third degree of the next sign. So from like those transitionary periods is when you feel the heaviest shifts, even like those precursor events, and then the after, or like initial events, and then
and it's so like seeing it, right, and feeling it is absolutely astonishing, and especially when you start to study it, very interesting, very eye-opening. Little fun fact, this was a little bit of my introduction to understanding astrology and what kind of got me intrigued to go forward and learn more about it. It was very eye-opening.
Yeah.
But just to summarize it a little bit here, the American Revolution with the themes of rebellion, pamphlets, nationhood. 1859 to 1866, we have the Civil War. There's division, duality, freedom versus slavery. 1941 to 1949, World War II, and the beginning of the Cold War. So you have ideological war, technology and communication are extremely prevalent. And 2025 to 2032, to be determined. but likely digital revolution, identity conflict, AI ethics, which we're actually kind of seeing a little bit of those AI ethics now.
Yeah.
Well, only time will tell. So, with that, where does this leave us today? Well, right back to the revolutionary territory. The U.S. Pluto return from 2022 to 2024 is our nation's cosmic rebirth, just like in 1776 and the events that happened pre and post. This is a time of reckoning, right? So power systems are being exposed and restructured. Trust in government, media, and financial institutions is shifting in huge ways today. And just this month, as I said, July 2025, we're about to see Uranus enter Gemini, and it will stay there until 2033. Just like during the original revolution, we're just about to see a major shakeup in how we communicate, how we share truth, and how we navigate the digital world. And we're seeing that now, as we were saying, with the entering the period of AI, even free speech battles and media transformation. Do you think we're on the edge of another transformation, stargazers? But Sophie is going to stress the importance of some key transits happening today.
Yes. All right. I want to do a special segment, which I think is important to stress and understand that we are in the throes of a 3-year period of massive transformation. Now, all outer planets will change signs, ushering in the age of self, meaning it's time to take responsibility for everything that happens to us and what we create on a subconscious level and with technology. Now, this shift is reshaping how we think and what we value materially in our everyday lives. Now, astrologer Christina by Big Beautiful Sky says that after the trifecta of monumental transits taking place from now until next year, the world will never be the same. And there won't be anyone left to blame but ourselves. So, what are these key upcoming transits? Pluto in Aquarius, which Pluto moved into Aquarius November 2024. Kind of ironic. Also, Neptune, which moved into Aries March 30th of this year. And Uranus going into Gemini July 8th, 2025. So in 4 days from, if you're listening to this podcast when we on our release date of this podcast, but July 8th is when Uranus is going into Gemini. And what is wild is that in the past, these transits occurred individually, but now they are all happening simultaneously, and that's major. In American history, when Pluto was in Aquarius from approximately 1777/78 until 1798, it would coincide with the American Revolution, a period of significant social and political upheaval. Simultaneously, Neptune in Aries, which took place during 1861 to 1875, which marked the beginning of the American Civil War, a period of intense conflict and societal transformation. And finally, Uranus in Gemini, 1941, shortly before the United States entered World War II, which symbolized, revolutionary changes in communication and technology. Now, the Jupiter-Uranus conjunctions bring creative breakthroughs. All right. So the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction often brings groundbreaking discoveries, awakening, and new movements. For example, in 1775 through 1776, the conjunction aligned with the start of the American Revolution and the landmark works like The Wealth of Nations and the history of the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. Now, the Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions bring a shift in labor. Historically, this conjunction marked the Industrial Revolution in the 1800s, and in 2020, it also brought the shift to remote work. Now, society's structure is reshaped when these planets meet. And I do want to say that all of this is not to scare anyone, but to prepare everyone. And as Christina says, that from Big Beautiful Sky, a lot of what is happening is kind of a reflection of what's happening inside and how we kind of move away from that materialism that's associated with Capricorn and into more humanitarian elements of Aquarius.
Yeah.
Right? So if we hone in on thinking of the we instead of the me, we could probably get through this smoother than if we just continue not learning from all the past things that came with Pluto and the other signs. And yeah, but that's my little spiel. And Heather,
I love that. I think that it's important for, as you said, to just get that word out there, get people thinking. Thank you for that, Sophie. I'm actually really sad to go on to this next segment because I don't want to stop talking. It's been fun and informative to give this information to all of you. But I'm sure you guys have realized it's time to wrap this episode up. But first, you know what we're going to encourage you with? Some soul homework. And in the last episode, we encourage you to start a moon journal and pay attention to the phases of the moon and the energetic forces of the moon. We really hope you learned something new and thoughtful with that journal, or you're starting to just find some fun reflections on yourself. And with that,
we invite you to share your insights on what you found most intriguing or noteworthy about the planetary placements and the events associated with the U.S. Revolution. Share them in the comments with the Stargazer community or message us personally through our website or DMs. We are interested to hear what you thought about this episode. If you thought of anything that we didn't mention that you want to share, I know we presented a lot of information, so please tell us anything that you found interesting or may have questions on.
Absolutely. And whether you're new to astrology or starting your journey by riding this cosmic wave with us, we sincerely hope you learned something new and fun today regarding how the energies of the cosmos influence not just individuals, but nations as well.
Our next episode is going to explore Mercury, Venus, and Mars, the remainder of the planets which are known as the Big Six. But first, don't forget to hit subscribe to whichever podcast platform you're listening to us on. That way you are the first to listen when we release our episodes every Wednesday and Saturdays.
Also, follow our socials. The direct links are available in the description section and on our website.
Yes, and rate the podcast wherever you're listening to it on. Please give it 5 stars if you really enjoyed.
High five.
Make sure you fill up all those little golden stars.
Yes.
Right?
And with that, we want to remind you all to keep reaching for the stars and trusting the vibes. Until next time, Stargazers.